Hi, I'm Ben,
And I'm Josh.
and this is the Bad and Magic Podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. Welcome to episode 24.
And I am going to forego my usual numbers analysis because 24, there's too much to talk about 24. Divisible by 2, by 12, by 6. It's a great number. Too much to talk about.
You'd said that you wanted to kind of revisit a topic we talked about in the past with mobile gaming, so what do you got for us?
Yeah, we're going to start right off with my confession now. Is like we had that whole big, like you had this whole giant revelation about your mobile gaming experience and how...
Oh, man.
Yeah, that was deep and heavy, and it felt like an after-school special for a little bit. But but it was a good conversation to have.
Yeah.
And I had mentioned that I at one point had downloaded a one of those little mobile game things, like the pay-to-win things. And I played it for a couple of days, and the curtain kind of got pulled back, and I saw, I was like, aha, this is where you're going to get my money. And then I immediately bailed. Well, since then, I actually downloaded another one. Same reason. Like, I kept seeing ads for it pop up, and then, like, the gameplay looked decent. Like, I was just curious enough about how the game would play to try it out. With the same, I go in with my eyes open. I know what this is. Like, the thing is, I'm having the opposite experience because I'm still playing it now, and here it is a week later. And it's like you walk into... Imagine going to like a carnival and expecting like, all right, these guys are just here to rip me off and take all my money, but they're not going to get me. I know the score. But instead of like an old-timey carnival, you're walking into like Disneyland where everybody is genuinely nice and friendly and everything's like just good and fun. But you're on your guard the whole time and you're just constantly looking for where's the catch? Like they're going to get me somewhere and where is it coming from? So this is AFK Arena is what I've been playing.
Okay, I haven't heard of it. AFK standing for away from keyboard?
Yes, it's an idle game in that you have like a couple of little cartoony characters that are your team, and they have different abilities and things.
Uh-huh.
And while you're not playing, they are acquiring experience. Like when the main page of the UI for the game it shows your little team at the bottom, and they're just constantly killing bad guys that come at them, and then all the experience and loot that they get just goes into this little like chest, and then you just tap on the chest to actually gather it all.
Okay.
And so you're constantly acquiring resources while the game is not playing.
I'm seeing common elements that go across all these games. I assume at some point the chest fills up and then they can't get any more unless you show up and interact a little bit.
Yes. So the chest only holds 12 hours.
So there's this lure to keep coming back.
Yeah, so there's that built-in mechanism. So I'm opening the app at least once every 12 hours to click that little chest. And, while I'm here, I'll play a couple levels since they got more experience. They leveled up, so... And I know I'm waiting for the paywall. I'm waiting to get to a level where now it is impossible to beat this unless I start putting real money down to like get the equipment and
the
get
Candy
the fast
Crush
upgrades.
Experience.
But here's the problem. I've been playing for a week and I have not hit that paywall yet.
Yeah.
Like I thought I had a couple of times, but then like I got to this level where the difficulty was just so high. I'm like, oh, well, I'm never going to beat this. So I turned the game off. But then I turn it on 12 hours later, and I've got all this experience accrued up, and I level up my guys a couple times, and I barely eke out that win in it and feel good about it. So I have yet to spend any money on this game, and I'm still progressing in it. But I can see, like, I see the store. Like, it's one of the main buttons. Like, here's the store. Here's where you can spend all your money and skip all of this tedious nonsense of you waiting around. But honestly, I'm okay with the waiting around. Like, if I just open it for a few minutes here and there and then log off of it. Now, I say that. Nicole's obviously going to have other sayings like, oh, he's been on that thing for hours a day the whole time he's had it. And she might be right for a day or two, but I don't know.
All right. I'll check in with you again. You'll have to let us know if you're still having fun and if they've suckered you into paying money for it yet.
Yes. So depending on what happens in the next couple of episodes of the podcast, we can either talk about this as like, oh, yeah, I hit the paywall and forgot about it. Or we could have the opposite intervention where you stop me from paying all this money into the game.
Well, okay. Well, here's the thing. If you play a game and you spend time on it and you enjoy it with the past business model where you would pay in advance for the game before you'd even had any fun with it whatsoever, and then you would get it. Sometimes you would pay and it would be a good game and you enjoy it, and sometimes you'd pay and it would kind of suck and you wouldn't use it, but you'd pay the same amount no matter what, and they'd have your money before you even started playing it. Now that you're having this opposite experience where it's free to play and then they're trying to get you to pay after the fact, do you ever feel like a capitalistic obligation to pay for the content you've consumed?
That's an interesting question. I mean, sometimes I know what you're talking about. Like people put these things out in the world, and then they ask for some kind of just some payback for it. It's like, hey, like I don't know where I've heard this before, but if you enjoy the podcast and you would like to support us, you can go to our Patreon link.
Right, like that.
Like that.
We put time and effort into making this thing. We're giving it to you for free, but if you want to show us some love, we'd appreciate it.
Exactly. And it's funny because we say those things to people that are listening because we do put work and effort into this. And now you're making me confront that attitude that I have with free-to-play games like this where like I almost go into it like a challenge. It's like, haha,
you're not going to sucker me into giving you a single red cent for this game that I spend hours a day playing that you spent time and energy and your skills and expertise building and providing to me.
You've nailed it. It's like me versus the developers. It's like you're trying to build the world's best Skinner box to extract money from me, but I know all the tricks and I'm not going to fall for it, you jerks. But then, like you're saying, the actual other end of the spectrum, the other perspective on this is, hey, these guys did put a lot of time and effort into a game that you are extracting value from. So why are you not providing some of that value back to them? Yeah, okay, you got me there. But at the same time, I'm not prepared to put my credit card number into this game. Like, oh, well, I'll send them $1, right? Like, what's $1? And that shows my appreciation for their time and development. But then now that my credit card's in the game, like that makes it one click to buy stuff. And that's just, I need that extra barrier right now.
Okay. Yeah, I understand. I got it. But I'm conscious of that. Like I reach a point where with the free to play kind of pay model, I recognize at some point like, hey, these guys deserve some of my money because if I don't give them some of my money, maybe they won't keep producing the game, and I like it.
Yeah. I mean, I get that. Me being the bad person that I am, I think about all of the suckers that they rope in that are pouring thousands of dollars into it. And I think to myself, well, that covers my cost too.
They're subsidizing your gameplay experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I mean, I get that. It's the same kind of ethic when you are like, you're going to like a public park and there's like a donation box, or a museum that's free to the public and there's a donation box in the entryway. Do you ever stop and drop a few bucks in the donation box?
I don't. Never.
Okay. I generally do that kind of thing. I just think.
Well, Ben, on behalf of all the people like me that don't give any of their money away,
you're welcome.
I want to thank you for subsidizing these public events for me.
All right. Well, speaking of other public events, because this has been a bit of a cultural phenomenon for a while, and now it's kind of reached a new level of popularity because Disney Plus made it available. Let's talk about the musical Hamilton.
Let's talk about the musical Hamilton. So, my wife got me into musicals when I first met her back in the day. Like, I was never a big musical kind of fan. Like, I remember
did not know this about Nicole.
She's very much.
Alicia and I are both very much into musicals.
Oh, she's a very musical person. She grew up in a musical family. She was classically trained as a singer.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
She sings wonderfully, and she hates doing it.
Oh, man, we got to tell this story about the karaoke contest in the Bahamas sometime.
Yes, that is a good story. But anyway, so she got me into musicals, and then she's also a huge history buff. She has a history degree. Why shouldn't she be? And now that I'm older and out of, like, isn't this crazy? After you get out of school, you start recognizing how important history is, but at the time, you loathe it.
History.
Like the entire 20th century was defined by World War I and subsequently World War II, and I didn't have any appreciation for that whatsoever.
Except that you had to study it.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so this show Hamilton comes out on Disney Plus. I think I'd vaguely heard of it once or twice, but I had no idea. I had zero idea what it was going to be like going into it. I expected
like you don't know who Lin-Manuel Miranda is or anything like that.
Nothing like that.
Okay.
Like the only thing I knew about Alexander Hamilton was he was one of the founding fathers, and he was shot by Aaron Burr.
Okay.
And I knew that from the 1993 Got Milk commercial. Like,
right. Where he's trying to tell the guys that it's Aaron Burr, but he can't because he has a mouthful of peanut butter sandwich.
Exactly. Aaron Burr. Like, that's the only reason I know anything about Alexander
I'm putting
Hamilton.
a link to that in the show notes.
But then we started watching it, and it was funny because Stephen Colbert, we saw an interview with Stephen Colbert with one of the actors afterwards, and he summed it up perfectly. The first 15 minutes, you're just kind of flabbergasted, and you're like, are they going to be able to sustain this for the whole show? And in the second 15 minutes, you're kind of like, well, yeah, okay, I guess they are going to be able to sustain this for the whole show. And by the end of it, you're like teary-eyed because Hamilton got shot. And like you don't even realize, like you just, after a while, the format and how really modern and different it is from any other musical I've ever seen, just kind of, you forget about it once you get used to it and you get sucked in. And it is a really good production.
So I haven't watched it. Do you recommend it?
I do recommend it for certain people. Like if my parents ask me, "Hey, should we watch Hamilton?" I'm telling them no. You're not going to enjoy it. It's like 2 hours and 45 minutes long. They are admittedly kind of hard to understand until you get used to the very fast speaking, like rapping format that they're doing. Like you've really got to be paying attention. And if you don't have an appreciation for like Revolutionary War type environment or the history of the young founding of the government, you're not going to get anything out of it, honestly. But I don't think I'll ever watch it again, but I'm very happy that I watched it this time, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
Like there's a lot of movies I can say the same thing about. It's 2 hours and 40 minutes, very long. I'm not going to watch it again, but I am glad that I watched it.
Okay. And have you done any research? Like, how aware are you of the accuracy of the depiction of the historical content?
Nicole filled me in on all that because I didn't do. I did research one thing that they mentioned in the show was talking about how Alexander Hamilton set up the current federal or the federal government's like financial system, like when it was first incepted. And so like I was just interested in like, oh, what I'm an accountant, so I'm naturally like, oh, well, what kind of a financial system are we talking about? And so that was interesting to learn a little bit about. But Nicole was filling me in like throughout the show as she's on her phone, and she told me that basically they took every known fact about Alexander Hamilton and kind of put it in this show in one form or another.
Okay. Huh. Interesting. So it's not necessarily in the right order or anything, but they tried to make sure everything had a degree of veracity.
Yes. I think everything that happened in there has one degree of veracity or another. And there's a lot of just very entertaining and interesting things that happen in the show. For example, we are brought up from like a very young age to like kind of idolize Thomas Jefferson as this, pillar that held up the founding of this nation, right?
Yeah.
And in this show, he's kind of depicted as a narcissistic jerk and kind of an antagonist at certain points.
Not to mention a slave owner.
We don't mention that. I mean, come on now. Come on, Ben. That happened in like ancient history, and this country wasn't founded on weird principles. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for every man that owns land and is white and is actually a man. That's what we're talking about. No one can ever mess that up.
Yeah. Well, that actually gets to something we're going to get to a bit later on, because you and I started having a text debate this week about freedom of religion and COVID-19. But before we get to that, there's a couple other things. Last time you and I had talked about, I'd almost offhandedly thrown out there Disney Pixar's Cars, and you about had a coronary because you apparently, this is, I don't know, a pet peeve of yours? You want to talk about the reality of the universe full of talking cars with giant eyeball windshields?
Well, is that any less crazy than talking about the magic systems in the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
No, it's not. So I'm going to suspend my disbelief here, but I also am going to take a bit of a adversarial stance, and let's talk about the Cars universe.
Okay. So my biggest problem with the Cars universe is that they are all cars. And that's a really stupid statement, but hear me out on this. In this supposed...
Wait. You're saying that in a movie called Cars, everyone's cars. That's your biggest problem.
I preface that this is a stupid point, but let me get there.
Okay.
If there are no humans that have ever existed in this universe, where would the idea of cars even come from? Like, like cars exist because we made cars, but there are no people. So who made the freaking cars? Right.
The form of a car is built around the form of a human being. Like if there were just autonomous machines, they wouldn't have room for a person in the middle.
Right. Okay. That's a stupid point. Let's just move right past that. Let's move right past that.
Well, hang on. No, let's not move past that, because I actually anticipated you asking this exact question, and I have a theory.
Okay. Oh, is this the theory that like all the Pixar movies are tied together, and this is like a post-Wall-E apocalypse or something?
Maybe.
Okay.
Yes, like post-apocalyptic, but no. Let's just say that the cars became self-aware and killed all the human beings, and still exist, but the humans are all gone.
Yeah, I think there's a cracked YouTube video that they talk about all the Pixar movies exist on one timeline, and like Cars is a post-Wall-E apocalypse where all the humans are gone in space, and then all the robots became self-aware and just.
I don't know. The world's too clean for that, but okay.
Okay. So then that's accept the fact that they're cars and they're machines, but they're alive.
Machines for transporting humans with human compartments everywhere.
So then let us just embrace the movie for what it is. And then we take the movie's Cars, which are, here, like the first Cars movie was a good movie. The second Cars movie was a complete disaster. The third one was just a remake of the first one. And then we have the kind of the spin-off ones, which was Planes, the first two Planes movies.
Oh. I regret watching the first one and didn't watch the second one. And I of my recent cinema going history, I think Planes will be in my top 3 biggest regrets.
Planes
and I walked out of Captain Underpants.
I still have young kids, and they loved Captain Underpants. Yeah, Captain Underpants was terrible, but Captain Underpants was a chore. It's like, I'm here for my kids.
Right.
Like the same way you go to Chuck E. Cheese.
But that's why we like movies like Big Hero 6. It can entertain a kid, but it isn't pandering. It's accessible to the adults.
Okay, so but you never saw the second Planes movie.
No.
Okay, there is an important piece of information that expands the universe a little bit in the second Planes movie that is what makes me the most insane about this entire thing.
Go ahead.
And the idea is, at the beginning, they have this montage of Dusty Crophopper winning races, and he's doing well, but they always show him redlining his engine every time. And as you would expect, he gets to a point where, like, his gearbox breaks. It's like, oh, well, you can't keep pushing your gearbox. It's going to break and you'll never fly again. Like, your engine will, it's really
It's supposed
hazy.
to be an analog to a human injuring themselves so that they can no longer compete.
Yes, except that he has a clear, like, analog gauge on his dashboard that he can see, even though it's built into his eyeballs somehow. That never mind. We're not talking about that.
Right.
So it's almost as if you were walking around with an EKG strapped to your wrist, and you were a professional marathon runner, and you knew that if you got your heart rate over a certain rate for a certain amount of time, you would die. But that's unclear, because they don't say if he would die. They just say he would never be able to race again. So is he going to be dead, or is he just going to be, like, wheeling around and can't turn his prop anymore? And then the whole idea is that they're trying to get a new gearbox for him so he can keep racing, but the manufacturer doesn't make that part anymore. So this opens up this huge conspiracy, like, questioning, like, venue of where are all these parts coming from? Who's making them? And dear God, why would you stop? It's like, I have.
They don't have the same. Can you imagine if human beings just had interchangeable parts?
Well, not only that, but then like, I have a Type C heart, but they stopped making those 16 years ago, so I really got to take care of this one. Yeah, exactly. How dare you stop making my heart, you jerks?
Well, so I'm not gonna. Oh, well, in that case, maybe I better watch Planes 2. No, I'm not watching Planes 2.
Planes 2 is nothing like Planes 1. It's about firefighters and like it. It's a good message, but the movie's kind of crap. Anyway, at the end of the movie, like the whole arc, I'm going to spoil it for you right here, is that he has to push his engine to the max one last time to scoop the water and save 2 RVs that were trapped on a bridge that was burning, right? And then his engine seizes and he crashes. And then the next scene, they like do the cut to black, and then he's in a hangar somewhere.
Sure,
and
like the Hudson Hornet crashing the last race. His career is over.
Well, but this is his gearbox, right? Is he dead? Can he never fly again? We don't know. But then they show this forklift working on him, and they do like the day-night cycle while they have a steady shot for like days and days. He's unconscious in this airplane hangar while this forklift is working on him. And he comes and he wakes up out of it. And he says, "Oh yeah, about your gearbox. I made you a new one, custom with my shop over here. You're good as new." And then it just like, okay, so now 2 things. One, we have some mysterious manufacturer of parts that actually like makes these things that are alive now. And 2, forklifts are the only things that have the closest analog to hands. Because cars and planes can't physically manipulate objects.
You
that
mentioned
aren't
this
made for
last
them.
time. You're imagining like the little forklift from Cars being the one that has the most power because he can actually manipulate things.
Yeah, it's like, oh, hey, Dusty, you need a new gearbox? Here's a new gearbox. Who's going to install it for you? You got to come to me. Like, there's no reason the forklift shouldn't be the godfather of the entire Cars universe because they're the only ones that can fix these things.
Let me pull you back down out of the outrage stratosphere. So I was listening to, I think it might have been like the director's commentary track on the Cars DVD or something like that. I tried looking it up and I couldn't find it, but I recall listening to them talking about these meetings that the early founders of Pixar, they would go to an offsite somewhere and drink and spend a good time together, but then also spend some time just brainstorming out the future. And it probably leads to like that crack video you're talking about, where it's all some kind of one big consolidated universe, because it kind of is. It all came from the imaginations of these creative people that were doing pioneering things with computers and technology, and something as pioneering as Toy Story, which then became Bug's Life and WALL-E and Ratatouille and Cars. And Cars was kind of a pet project by one of the guys who just loved cars. And it was really just born out of this love of cars, but they didn't want their storytelling and fondness for racing and the beauty and speed of a car bogged down by having people in the story. So they just dispensed with the people and just made a story about cars. So I'm going to give them some leeway for like, what are the mechanics of the universe? They weren't really out to do that.
Do we give the same leeway to other movies with these magic systems when they break the rules?
So I asked that question here in the notes. Is Cars kind of a soft magic system? Are we just supposed to suspend our disbelief about how did they get parts and where were they born or made? Or, where did they come from? What happens to them when they die? It's just a soft magic system.
So, I will say in the first 3 Cars movies and probably the first Planes movie, I would say that yes, it's actually a hard magic system because it is just that. It is the one fact. Cars, these transportation machines, cars, helicopters, airplanes, they're alive and they're things. Okay, I get that. They have tires, they can change the tires like shoes. That makes sense. Those things are external. Planes 2 introduced the concept of interchangeable internal parts.
Which are hard to get to.
Yeah, which are like, do they die? Do they have surgery? Are there car doctors? There are way too many questions posed by that one simple fact that
I must
breaks
have
the whole
seen
thing.
Cars 10 times before I finally realized that Rusty's medicated bumper ointment was supposed to be an analog for like hemorrhoid cream. And that's why all their supporters were geriatric.
Yeah, like I don't even have anything funny to say about that because like that's just nightmarish. Like,
but that's why Lightning was supposed to be so embarrassed by it.
Yeah, by his big time sponsors or whatever. Yeah. And I get in that
Can you imagine driving the Preparation H Ford?
But that informs his character arc, right? Because at the beginning he's embarrassed and doesn't want to even be associated with them. But by the end he realizes that they're the ones that gave him
his big shot.
That's right. Yeah, and that's why it is a good movie. It is good storytelling because it has such a great character.
It's just Doc Hollywood, but with cars. Have you seen Doc Hollywood?
I have not seen Doc Hollywood.
Oh, so okay.
I can't.
It was a movie with Michael J. Fox where he's this fancy big-time doctor. He goes through this small-time town. He gets his foot stuck in the door and has to stay around and learns how to be a better human because of the old folksy type of... It's the exact same movie, and it's way older. It's the exact same movie.
Well, then it sounds like Michael J. Fox went through an excellent character arc in Doc Hollywood. But, so good storytelling, bad magic system.
Yeah. All right. We'll leave Cars alone for now. So one other cleanup item we had from last time was that you and I had just touched ever so briefly on the idea of the rules governing passwords for identification of users on information systems.
Yes. And
all right.
there is so much about passwords.
So
we both just froze there for a second, but like where do we even start with this?
Okay, so here's where I want to start with it. You're familiar with the old adage of boiling a frog. You know, that the frog, if the frog jumped into some hot water and it was hot, it would jump right out. But if you boil the frog slowly, it can cook. I've looked that up and it's not true. Frog jumps out every time. There's no such thing as a boiled frog in a slowly warmed pot.
Yes, they did an experiment where they slowly turned up the heat on the frog and he stayed in there and boiled, but they had removed the brain of the frog first, so it was kind of a disadvantage.
Right. There's no such thing. Frog always jumps out of the hot water.
Yeah.
Anyway, we still use that adage to mean the idea that you could just have something bad happen to you so slowly that you're not aware of the badness of it until you're cooked. What does it look to get cooked in passwords? I don't know, but here's where I want to go with this. So back in 2017, there was a news story that came out about a guy by the name of Bill Burr, not to be confused with Aaron Burr, who used to work for the National Institute of Standards of Technology, NIST. And in 2003, he wrote a very influential paper that was used to govern and was used as the basis for most of the governmental regulations regarding the institution and usage of passwords on information systems. So since that was prior to both of our careers in the military, any of our experience with government information systems was derived from this paper. And in the paper, he advocated things like use of special characters, use of numbers, and minimum length and frequent changes. All those four main things. And those are the source of most of the headaches that you and I endure today. And the reason this was news was in 2017, he had an interview with the Wall Street Journal when he said, and I quote, "Much of what I did, I now regret." So he basically rescinded all of that advice. Mostly because, and here's what I want to kind of derive from everything I read about that, was that there's a root assumption that was false. And that is that all of those standards are technical standards, but security is a combination of a technical system and a human interaction. And those standards were only based on the execution of the technical portion of the system, but they did not take into account the human interaction with the system.
That makes sense.
So the problems that arise when you apply that guidance that he gave in 2003 is that as users accumulate accounts for different information systems, just like anyone who uses the internet knows, every website, every store, every email interface, anything requires you to create an account and then create a password. And if they're all enforcing these standards, let's just say this standard here that requires a minimum 8-character password with a combination of special characters, uppercase and lowercase numbers, and it must be changed every 90 days. And let's say the average user has somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 5 dozen accounts out there somewhere. The cognitive burden on a single person becomes exponential. It becomes so massive, it's not possible to accomplish. For you to have a unique password that meets those complexity requirements for every account is like memorizing the order of 2 randomized decks of cards.
So I hear what you're saying, and this is why there's an entire space of software to solve these problems. Like Google Chrome has a built-in password management system. Isn't that nice of them? There are third-party applications that you can download that will store all of your passwords in an encrypted file on your computer that you can only access by putting in another password. So you have one password to get you into all of your other passwords. And it's just like you're talking about, it's become so burdensome, people are now profiting from it.
Well, here's the part they weren't accounting for. When you lay this burden on your user group, who for the most part are using your information system in good faith, they have to compensate. So what kind of things do people do to compensate for the complexity of the task you're asking them to accomplish?
So either slap the same random numeral and special character at the end of a normal word that you would use for a password anyway.
Right.
People, I learned this trick in the military. It's like, I've got to change my password every 30 days and it's got to be 16 characters long. And somebody told me, just make the pattern on the keyboard. That's what everybody does. And you just, that's perfect. And you just go from the number 1 down to the number 2 down, and then hold down shift and do 3 down, and then do 4 down. And then you've got all your uppercase, all your lowercase. It's long enough. You can easily remember it because you just type it in with muscle memory. Yeah.
Okay. So either you do something predictable or you write it down. Like you just get out a piece of paper, you write it down, you stick it at the bottom of your keyboard or in your desk drawer or on your monitor even. I've seen those kinds of things.
Yeah, I'll neither confirm nor deny that I have people in my life that write down all of their passwords on one piece of paper at an easily accessible place.
So you're filling a role, and I appreciate the role that you're filling right now, of kind of this like incredulous person at the silliness of that. I'm more of a security purist in this. I want to create a system that all of my users who are using it in good faith, even at the low end of the curve, who don't have a great memory or just can't execute this complicated task we're asking them can still exist within the system, and I can still provide a secure system. So instead of assuming that my system will only be secure if all of my users execute up to this high standard that I've set, rather I'd say, what's the lowest thing I can expect people to do, and I want my system to still be secure even if they don't do that.
Yeah, instead of defining the upper boundary, define the lower boundary. What is the
Yes.
lowest limit of security that I'm willing to accept to keep my system secure?
Exactly. There was a quote in one of the articles where I think Bill Burr said, few would argue with getting a lot more security for a little inconvenience. But if the decision-making process is obscure, how can we be sure we're not getting lots of inconvenience for little improvement in security? And that's exactly what this ended up being. And that's why he regrets the advice that became this paper, because we're getting lots of inconvenience for not actually a lot of improvement in security. There's this great XKCD cartoon about this I'm going to put a link to in the show notes, where he basically shows the math of it, that when you follow these password guidelines, the task you're actually asking a computer to do to decode it, even if you use letters and numbers and uppercase and lowercase and symbols and 8 characters, still it only would take a computer about 3 days to crack it. If, on the other hand, you just type a simple, silly phrase that's 20 characters long, easy for you to remember, all lowercase, no numbers, no special characters, it would take a computer 500 years to decode. Because the real important factor here is the length of what you put versus the complexity of what you put.
So I'm going to push back on that a little bit, because there was a problem that the NSA pointed out to Microsoft. This is years and years ago. Whether it's still a valid thing, I don't know. But they basically mathematically proved that the way that Windows had implemented passwords in a previous version, we're talking Windows XP or Windows 2000 or something, that any password length over, like, I think it was 8 or 10 characters, basically added nothing to the complexity mathematically for cracking the password.
Yeah, and you're talking about what's going on behind the scenes. That's since changed. You know, it's like SHA 256 hashes, and they're really big. So, yeah. But you're saying that there was a point in time where, like, it would just truncate whatever you provided. You could put something that was 50 characters long, but it would only count the first 8.
Right.
Right. Well, that's not the case anymore.
There's
enough. Another funnel assumption here that's a problem that we have to acknowledge in all of this, and that is a security thing is a system. It's not just your password. Like, that's not the only thing. If you're saying what we're talking about is something that hackers call, something in the security community is called brute force hacking, and that is imagine you have a combination lock. Let's say it only has one tumbler, and it has 99 combinations on it. So you try 1 and check it, and it doesn't work. You try 2 and you check it, and it doesn't work, and you go till you find the right number, and then it works. That's brute force hacking. So if you have an 8-character password and you're using like an ASCII keyboard, there's only so many possible characters you could type in, and for a computer it's virtually trivial for it to be able to guess every possible character combination in 8 digits if you can have a server that will simply allow you to keep checking. So if I were saying, hey server, is the password A? And the server goes, no. And you say, is it B? No. Is it C? No. So in any system where that exists, then you can brute force hack any password given enough time, and it can happen relatively quickly.
Well, dear listeners, here's an excellent example for you to go try yourself. The easiest and simplest way to protect yourself against brute force attacks, I actually implemented in our Bad at Magic Fitness Challenge website. If you go to log in and you put in an incorrect login, I have it hard-coded into the system to wait 2 seconds before it gives the page back to you. And so, like, you can brute force a password if you really want to, but I just increased the level of the amount of time that it's going to take to do that from possibly hours to potentially weeks.
Right. And that's one protection you could take. Another very common protection, I'm not aware of any websites that don't use it, is this system has a hard-coded number of consecutive failed password attempts.
Yep, you get locked out after 3
and then
tries.
you get locked out and require administrative intervention. Yep. So six consecutive failed password attempts and the account becomes locked. So there's no such thing as brute forcing anymore. I don't know why we even talk about it.
Because that's the simplest thing for people to understand about passwords. Like, this is the easiest way for people to understand how passwords are broken and why they're important.
Right. There's other controls as well. I mean, now people don't understand what they're getting for it, but we have a lot of other things like security questions, two-factor authentication, those kinds of things. Two-factor authentication is just a shortcut for meaning there's two different ways to validate your identity before we give you access to a system. So that's
when your bank sends you a text message when you're trying to log into your bank account.
You don't realize how much security that's giving you, but that's giving you a ton of security because they have independently stored your cell phone number, and they send you a code, and I'm sure it has a lockout as well, or just a few numbers of attempts it'll allow, but it's usually like a 6-digit code, and if you don't have that code within a few seconds, then you can't get in, even if you know the username and password.
Not only is that protecting you, but the fact that if you're just driving around doing your thing and you get a text message from your bank, here is your login authentication code, you, as the owner of the account, are immediately flagged that something's fishy.
Right. So the future, and what I always keep hoping for, I feel like a lot of my life I've just spent waiting in limbo. Like it's so easy to see the science fiction future where everything's going to be blissful and perfect, but I've got to live in the past where we have dirty automobiles and old technology where I'm waiting for flying cars and electric everything. But
do we want to talk about public key interface? Please tell me we want to talk about PKI.
Okay, give me 1 second. Let me land this plane. So, as you know, a few years ago, we passed the date that was Back to the Future 2, which came out back in the 80s, and it predicted the future, and they had flying cars and rehydrating machines and all those kinds of things. And there's this scene, I love this scene, it always goes through my head, where Marty's wandering through the park, and they're recreating something that happened back in 1955, where there's a guy fundraising money to try to save the clock tower there in Hill Valley. Still needs to be saved, 70 years later. So Marty's wandering through the park, and he says, "Hey, buddy, thumb $100 to save the clock tower." And he just holds out like this tablet to him, which is prescient because tablets didn't exist back then. But all he was supposed to do was a biometric identification, which was his thumbprint. As we know, with any kind of biometric, it can be faked. Now that phones like recognize your face, you can just hold up a picture of someone or something like that. But a biometric is another way that you could authenticate someone's identity before you give them access to an information system. There's thumbprints, there's facial recognition, there's voice recognition, there's
retina scanning.
Retina scanning. I'm thinking of ones I've used in the real world. Iris scanning, which is actually one of the best out there. Hand geometry I've used. Have you ever used hand geometry?
I have not used hand geometry.
Disney uses it at their parks, or they did. Basically, just to link you to your ticket so that it can't be transferred.
Wow. That's hardcore for Disney. People really spoofing Disney tickets.
You just go through the park, you scan your ticket, and then you put your hand on the hand geometry scanner, and then they're linked. And then anywhere in the park you use your ticket, you have to do both. And it's two-factor authentication to make it non-transferable.
Huh, interesting.
You don't just possess the ticket; you also have to scan your hand. So anyway,
what you're talking about in the security community is the big three for authenticating in any these three main methods for authenticating. It's something you know, which is like a password; something you have, which would be like a key or a physical ticket; or something you are,
right?
Which is the biometrics. Like, you can't fake who you are. The only so like yeah, man, I've been waiting my whole life to get that RFID tag put into my wrist that is linked somehow electronically to my DNA, that I can just go to the store, and where the credit card machine is now, I just wave my hand in front of it. It's like, oh, it's this person. Here's his bank account information. Run the tab. It's done. Good. It's like, I'm going to be the first guy in line for that.
Me too. Now, those three things, and correct, that's what I mean when I'm saying 1-factor, 2-factor, or 3-factor identification. What of those three things you have? Something you know, something you have, and something you are. And so like 2-factor authentication, we say that, like if you know your username and password and you have your cell phone, then you can get into our website.
Yes.
And to make it even more secure, you would add who you are, and that would be your facial scan or those kinds of things.
Yeah, you would have to somehow, theoretically now, you would have to unlock the phone first. So there's another layer of authentication to get into the phone to get the text message in the first place.
That's why I hate it. Like when I go into like the pizza place and I use like Apple Pay, right in front of them, and it scans my fingerprint, validates my identity, and transmits my credit card information, and then their paper machine prints out a receipt and they hand it to me and they say, "Will you please sign this?" And I look at them and I'm like, I just validated my identity with my fingerprint. You want me to sign that piece of paper?
Does anybody even care? Does anybody on Earth even care that those slips are signed?
This is like me trying to tell the cable company to start trying to sell me broadcast cable. No one cares. But I do it anyway because I'm an idiot.
I go to the grocery store and I know what you're talking about. You have to sign credit card slips for transactions. But I go to the grocery store and I run my credit card all the time and they don't even ask for it anymore. And why aren't more businesses like that? Like, what is my signature giving you that, like, you've got your money, man. Let me go. Maybe this is a stolen credit card, and I just stole $150 worth of legitimate groceries. Shame on me.
Maybe the future holds just biometric identification as single factor by itself. I don't know. I mean, maybe then we end up with eye transplants so that we can sneak back into the place and save our life. But I was thinking Minority Report. But in the meantime, we live in just this weird half-step universe where we still are tied to all the crappy old rules of the past, where I still have systems out there that like lock me out if I don't log in every 30 days and change my password every 90 days. And it was this cat and mouse game for a long time where like people would do things like you said, where they would do patterns on the keyboards, and then the administrators would just put a little routine in the password change application that would recognize keyboard patterns and not allow you to do those.
This is the idea where you've got the little garden, and people find it convenient to walk through the garden. So we're going to start building fences. Yeah, we're going to start building fences around the garden to stop you from going through the most convenient way to get to where you're going. Yeah,
and I think any place that you see that happening, where there's this cat and mouse game between the designers and the users, I'm a firm believer in paving desire paths. If people start walking a place that isn't a path, put down pavement.
Just recognize that this is going to be the most convenient thing and the most desired thing for people to use in the first place.
Right, and make it happen. Figure out a way for that to be the secure option. Now, you mentioned a minute ago things that we can use now where you can still utilize a long, complex password in a system but without having to remember it by having a password manager. And those introduce their own set of vulnerabilities, but they do allow you to be secure, more secure than if you were just reusing the same password on every website you go to, or I don't know, some writing it down on your keyboard.
Yeah, I'd recommend to people, if you have problems with passwords, like if you have serious problems remembering passwords, this is a trick that I developed for myself a long time ago, is develop some kind of algorithm or instruction set in your brain that will allow you to calculate your password based on what the screen is that you're looking at, which is really poor security when you think about it, but it's going to generate, for example, this is one I'm pulling from the air. This is not the algorithm that I use. If I go to like a bank, if I'm on the Wells Fargo website, I'm going to type in for my password, Wells Fargo website, and then a standard like nonsense 4 or 5 digit special characters and numbers at the end of that.
Okay, and then you have a unique password for every website you're on that you can remember.
Exactly. But it'd be, what website am I looking at? Wells Fargo. Oh, I'm going to type Wells Fargo backwards. Or every letter that's underneath the letter of Wells Fargo. So like W, instead of typing WE, it would be SD for the first 2 letters. Like just some way to translate what you're looking at into a password that is universal for everything you go to.
I like what you're saying as far as just a pragmatic way of existing within the current restrictions that have been placed upon us. But I feel like it doesn't meet it doesn't pass my granny test. Like I want something that will help keep my granny secure too.
So what's going to keep this is the thing that people don't realize about security is security does not and should not be absolute. If you're talking about I want my house to be protected from burglars, then lock your doors. Don't put up iron bars over everything. Don't have 16 deadbolts and one of those big bars that goes on the other side of your door. That becomes inconvenient for you. It's not about being perfectly secure. It's about being secure enough that it becomes a hassle for people to try to break into your house. Because when the bad guy is trying to get into your house, if he has to, there's a certain level of effort that he's willing to expend. If you are more secure than that, he's going to move on and find a softer target.
Right, and that's generally the case. That's why from my time in England, where I was in a position where I was consuming a lot of just like research and intelligence data on actual execution of hacking attacks, the most common, without fail, method that we saw wasn't brute force. It wasn't, hacking as you think of in the television sense. It was social engineering. It's just the easiest thing to execute.
You need to read Ghost in the Wires. It's the biography of Kevin.
The author
Kevin
of Ghost in the Wires came and spoke to us.
Kevin
while I
Mitnick.
was there. Yeah.
Yeah, that guy, like he was the number one most wanted hacker on the planet for a long time. And if you listen to all the things that he did, 1% of it was technical knowledge. The rest of it was the ability to BS somebody he was talking to on the phone.
Yeah. So we had this situation brief from a research team from Verizon. Verizon, the cell phone services provider, but also a network services provider. And they came around and gave the example that they were having a fight of social engineering that was happening in the company. And these were high-profile cases related to celebrities. So somebody would somehow determine that a celebrity had Verizon as their services provider, and they would call up and spoof being that celebrity and just utilize a few techniques that would stress out the people on the support side in order to get them to give up a few details, and they would repeat it over and over until they're able to piece together enough details to then gain privileged access to the account.
Yeah. So if I get one little nugget from this person, like he misspoke or he read a line out of his screen that he wasn't supposed to, and then you slam down the phone, call back another operator and do the same thing, getting another nugget, you can pool all those nuggets together to sound like you're good enough to be authentic.
Right. So the point they were making in this was that what their system was failing to do was to allow them to correlate all of those failed attempts. The same as if you had a bot out on the internet pinging a web server trying to determine someone's username and password through brute force. It was like brute force social engineering, and the system was incapable, unless they actually called back and got the same operator twice, the system was incapable of basically flagging someone's account for attempted social engineering brute force attacks.
I feel like if you're Brad Pitt and you get, if I'm Brad Pitt and I call Verizon and I set up an account, I want to tell them, hey, by the way, go ahead and just flag my account now as high risk for fraud.
Right, and that's basically what they were doing. Because what had happened, I think, in one of these cases where then they got access to the celebrity's iCloud account and got some compromising photos, and yeah, it was really bad.
Oh, I completely flipped positions on this already because I am all for compromising photos of people that are
Brad
famous.
Pitt?
Yeah.
No, let's just stick with Brad Pitt here.
If any hackers are listening, any pictures you can get of Eric Skarsgård, I'm down.
That's your male celebrity crush. Mine's David Duchovny.
Oh, so old school. Man, I keep forgetting how old you are.
Let's talk bad at English. So when I was in England, every now and then someone would say something to everyone in the room that sounded very normal, and to me just sounded like alien language. And there was one time I think I was sitting there and I came into work and I asked where my supervisor was. I said, "Hey, has anybody seen John today?" And they said, "Oh, he's got the lurgy."
The lurgy?
The lurgy? Yeah, the dreaded lurgy. I'm like, okay.
He caught the clergy, or what's the lurgy?
The lurgy, yeah. So, caught the lurgy, or the dreaded lurgy, was a phrase they used, very commonplace slang, that meant, it was kind of a catch-all phrase that meant like a sickness that's easy to catch but not that serious. It was interchangeable for what we would call a cold or the flu. Now, if someone's missing from your office prior to COVID-19, do you feel it necessary to distinguish between the cold or the flu? Like, would you...
No, this is exactly the thought I was having when you started explaining what this meant. Like, that's a lot of words to say he's sick.
Right. He caught the lurgy, or he's got the lurgy, the dreaded lurgy.
Yeah, it sounds undeniably British and therefore higher class and more educated, but it's stupid in that it's more words to express the same information.
Yeah, he's got the flu. And it's only one extra syllable. And he's sick. He's sick today. Well, okay, so we would say sick. And that could mean kind of a whole host of things. And I would say that us just saying that phrase, he's sick, has like a maximum threshold. Like there's certain things that if he has those things, you're not justified in saying he's sick. Like if he's got cancer, appendicitis.
Well, now it depends on how much you really like the person that we're talking about. Let's call him Dan. If Dan is sick and he's a great guy and you like him a lot, it's like, oh, Dan's really under the weather and he's not doing great. Like that's one thing. If you hate Dan and Dan's a jerk, oh, he's sick. Screw Dan.
Yeah, but still saying sick to an American has like a maximum threshold. You're not going to say he's sick if he's like hospitalized with pneumonia.
If I hate him, I might, but I get what you're saying. You're right. It's probably not going to be that way.
But the lurgy has this very specific set of rules around it that meant it's probably the cold or the flu, not bad enough to go to the hospital, but not good enough to come into work. But we don't really know what it is.
This feeds back into the idea of me picturing you in a bar with a clipboard and like a stenographer's recording device.
Yeah.
And like just interviewing, like, tell me about the lurgy.
What? Say that again? How do you spell it?
Is there a maximum threshold of the illness of the lurgy? And like getting a couple of English dudes drunk and just discussing ad nauseum about the lurgy and the rules associated with it.
Yeah, and sometimes with these I'm wondering like, okay, why don't we do something like this? And this one in particular dates back to like a popular British radio show in the 50s, which is why I didn't quite jump the pond. But yeah.
Jump the pond. Like right there. I had to stop for a second and think about what you just said. Mr. British Idioms.
All right. That's it for bad at English. So there was something that came up related to COVID-19 that I wanted to talk to you about. So I have been, and I've documented on this podcast a bit of an experience I've gone through with kind of the tension between the state and church as, you know, how do you worship in this time when we're under quarantine and stay-at-home orders and those kinds of things. And for the most part, frankly, I don't look at my weekly worship service with a great degree of like relish. Like I don't look forward to it like it's my favorite hour of the week. It's just something I do. I feel it's important to my life, to my children, to the way I've chosen to lead my existence. But when the quarantine started, I gotta say it was a little bit of a relief to not feel the pressure of having to get up on Sunday morning, you know, put on my nice clothes and go and sit in a pew and listen to the sermons for the hours and do all my duties and those kinds of things.
You are going to be doing like the Mormon equivalent of like Hail Marys for admitting this on the podcast, because people are going to hear this and you're going to get in trouble.
But I'm a member of the leadership of my local congregation, and initially I had to. The initial response was, I don't know if you remember because it all happened so quickly, but back in March when the governors hadn't come out with stay-at-home orders yet, there was just this vague time where people were aware that it was transmitting. We didn't know how it was transmitting. There was word of outbreaks, and there was an initial time where people had a chance to make their own reaction. And my church reacted relatively quickly and canceled services before any executive stay-at-home orders had been given.
Yeah, it really felt like COVID was not a thing until it was a thing.
Right.
Like there was that weird, like it was. I can look back on one weekend where we were going about our normal lives, and like there was just this sense all around that like things weren't quite right. Like we went to the grocery store as a family like we normally do, and half the shelves were empty. And like that was kind of the first wake-up call. Like something's going down here.
So from my church leadership perspective, what happened is that time where we voluntarily canceled services, and yet, so one of the things we do at the service is we take the sacrament, which is bread and water in remembrance of Jesus, like he commanded in the New Testament. And that's considered a relatively vital thing to do on a weekly basis, to gather and partake of the sacrament and remember Jesus. So even though we did other things for our 2 hours of meetings, if we say, all right, we can't do anything else, we're only going to get together to do one thing, that's the one thing we'll do. So after they canceled services,
so there's like this mass illness going around, but so we're not going to congregate, but we are going to have somebody take a cracker with their dirty hand and stick it into your mouth.
So the way we take the sacrament is you pass around a tray and you put it in your own mouth. But yeah.
Oh, still, okay. So you have a tray that passed through everybody's licked fingers.
you're right. There is a potential transmission vector there. Agreed. But I'm still talking. Stick with me here. I'm still talking that very first week when there were no governmental orders and there wasn't really good understanding of how this thing was transmitted and that kind of thing. And I remember we'd received an order from on high to cancel services, but there was this real serious churn within my local leadership to try to circumvent it, basically by distributing the sacrament to everyone's homes. So then they were trying to organize groups of priesthood holders to go to everyone's homes and administer the sacrament to them in their homes as like an analog for actually having the service of the church. And it would allow for a much better control of disease and that kind of thing. But to me, it felt kind of wrong-headed. Like I thought, no, if we're just going to try to like not have church at the building, but still try to hold it in people's homes, we're not really preventing the transmission of this disease. We're just doing it point to point instead of gathering in one spot.
That reeks of, we don't like these rules, so we're going to try to get around them.
Yes, it does. But again, there weren't rules yet. There was 1 week where we had a meeting and we were having all this discussion, and I was definitely the dissenting opinion when it came to this kind of thing. And then that Friday, before we were supposed to meet that Sunday, the governor of Illinois at the time, and this was all happening on very localized basis, gave the stay-at-home order. And consistent with our church's stated belief that we believe in being subject to the laws of the land in which we live, then the regional leadership said, follow the guidance you're receiving from your governor and no visiting people's homes to administer the sacrament. And we called it off. I don't think we even did it 1 week, but there was a time period where we were planning it.
Right. So this kind of, you alluded to this earlier in the podcast when we kind of, like, you almost threw it out kind of offhandedly. We were talking about another topic related to COVID-19, and you had brought up that you were, in some strong language, in my opinion, that you were very concerned about how this is affecting, the constitutional rights we have to, peacefully assemble. Freedom of religion type stuff. And so then we kind of got into a little back and forth about it before, we both kind of stopped like, oh, we should probably talk about this on the podcast.
So so let me transition to that. So since that time back in March when the governor gave the order, we have not held any organized meetings in the church building, and we haven't been traveling to each other's homes to administer the sacrament. The only kind of church-related traveling I've done is very specific and very welfare-oriented. I went and helped one guy move who had a broken foot. I helped him move some heavy furniture, and I visited an elderly lady that had a bed that she needed moved. Those just very specific welfare-related needs. I know we also distribute food for needy families and those kinds of things, and precautions are taken in those kinds of things, but very essentials-oriented. And I was comfortable with where we were. I was comfortable with, okay, it felt to me like we had voluntarily discontinued our worship services for a good reason. It was justified, and we were all in agreement. That was the position I was living. Then someone sent me a link to a speech given by one of the highest leaders of my church, one of the members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. His name's David A. Bednar, and there's this annual conference that has nothing to do with COVID-19 called the...
Oh, you should know this.
I want to make sure I'm getting the exact title of it. The 2020 BYU Law School Religious Freedom Annual Review. So the law school at our church university holds an annual review where they basically just review what's happening in the world related to religious freedom. And he was giving a keynote speech in that. And it's important to note that because this wasn't given spontaneously. This was a speech given to talk to students of a law school about the state of religious freedom in America.
Okay.
I want to read just a portion of what he wrote here because it's important to have the context. The following examples highlight some of the things we may now see and hear more distinctly because of the demands and constraints imposed upon us by COVID-19. COVID-19 has alerted us to many of the limitations in the supply chain processes that bring food from the fields, farms, and processing plants to our local grocery stores and kitchen tables. COVID-19 has alerted us to our dependence upon foreign nations for many of our essential medical supplies, pharmaceuticals, and a wide variety of other strategically important products. COVID-19 has alerted us to many of the constraints of just-in-time inventory and delivery systems for manufacturing plants and retail businesses. COVID-19 has alerted us to many of the deficiencies in our national and local healthcare systems. COVID-19 has alerted us to the importance of defending the borders between personal liberty, constitutional rights, and governmental authority. So, we've documented almost all of those previous 5 things on this podcast. It ended up, we're having limitations in hospitals and grocery stores and all those kinds of things. And he's saying it has also been a wake-up call or an alarm alerting to us that our constitutionally protected right to freedom of religion is a bit more tenuous than we thought.
So, and this is where you and I kind of started getting into a back and forth because there obviously you have a much stronger vested interest in freedom of religion than I do. You're kind of on the end of the government is kind of overstepping, and I'm kind of on the side of the government is fine. So my proposal then is that we have a discussion back and forth where we're both on these sides that I think we naturally land on. But then I think it's important for us to actually take the opposite side for a little bit and go through the thought process of the other person just to make sure that we're not crazy. Does that make sense?
I like it. I agree to those rules.
Okay. So how are we... This is the next question that I had, and we talked very, very scantily about this, is we need to define the broadness and the scope of this conversation. Are we talking specifically about the restrictions that the government is placing on religious organizations to assemble during this crisis, and then that slider goes all the way up to, does the government have a right to restrict constitutional rights in any way, shape, or form for any reason?
Yes, that's the first question. What should or shouldn't the government be able to forbid in the name of public health?
Okay. So then on my side, it is preface, asterisks before we even get started on this whole thing. Ben is a fantastic researcher, and I expect to lose this debate. I'm pulling all of this from the air. But here we go. So I'm going to do my best.
Okay, but again, I want to say, until I listened to what he had to say about this, I was on the other side. I thought we'd done all this voluntarily. I didn't feel like the government was taking any of my rights away.
So I think is important. Like the main purpose of the federal government is to defend the rights and the freedoms that people have.
We're saying the federal government, but in our system, this was done by local executives.
Well, let's say the state. Let's say the government, whatever level it is. Because if governments, like right now, I'm living under different levels of government, and each one has said different things and put different restrictions upon me.
We've highlighted that in this show. What's happening in Arizona is different than what's happening in Illinois.
Right. And so we're just going to say the government to be an external governing body.
But not federal government.
Not necessarily, but maybe. Up to and including. The government, the role of government is to provide for its population. The reason we created this government, the reason we funded this government, the reason we elect theoretically the best of us to go be a part of this government is to protect our interests. And our interests during a global pandemic is for the general welfare and safety of the population. And if that means giving up some level of freedom, whether it be freedom of movement, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion in some cases, as long as it is understood and is known to be a temporary measure, then I think it's fine. And this is where we get into that really gray area, because there's a lot of things that have been done on an emergency basis that turned into communist Russia. So
right.
The trick here is that we can't be vesting these emergency powers into Emperor Palpatine just for this little crisis on Naboo. We have to make sure there's set time limits to this stuff.
Right. So in this speech that he gave 4 main points, and I think this can help guide the discussion. I wrote them in the notes if you want to look at them. The first is that government power can never be unlimited. And he's saying that, there were instances here in this case where it felt unlimited, what the kind of things that they were doing. I mean, you can imagine at the extreme end, you've got men with guns roaming the streets and enforcing curfews and stuff like that. But You also have examples of, police running through neighborhoods that are about to be overtaken by a brush fire, telling people to evacuate, and some people don't, and they burn to death in their homes. I mean, it's
Yeah, so here's the difference in this situation. I know what you're saying. The government shouldn't have unlimited power to do these kinds of things. This situation is unprecedented in that your choices are not just affecting you. Like
sure.
in the brush fire example, if you choose to stay in your home, the only person that
you're
you're
the only
endangering,
one that gets hurt.
Exactly. In this scenario, if you flaunt government, like the regulations that the WHO, that the CDC is putting out, and that a lot of government agencies are saying that you need to follow, not only are you endangering yourself, but you are potentially endangering other people. And that, in my mind, I've said this before on the podcast, like you should be allowed to do anything that you want to do so long as it affects nobody else. As soon as you cross the line into interacting and interfering with other people's ability to do what they want to do, now there needs to be rules and regulations involved in that.
That just made me wonder about things I've heard in the past. Like, for instance, deliberately having unprotected sex with someone when you know you're HIV positive. Like, is that attempted murder? Or...
Should that be a crime?
These kind of things have already been decided in courts before. I'm sure these kind of questions have been grappled with, but it's the same fundamental issue.
Well, and this is the problem, and this is the biggest issue that we face, especially in my state, like where we are still like the hottest spot in like I think the planet right now for COVID-19 daily cases and confirmed. And
I posted a graphic on the Bad Magic Facebook page where it shows that even though the U.S. is the hottest spot on the planet, Illinois is the coolest spot in the U.S. and Arizona is the hottest spot in the U.S.
And I can only imagine that is because you live there and I live here. Just to show how different we are.
Take personal credit for that.
That's right. Bad Magic Podcast, the reason we are all dying. There are a lot of people in my state that are deliberately saying, oh, well, the government can't tell me what to do. And like, listen, all you don't tread on me flag-waving people out there. I genuinely think you're nut jobs, but that's fine. You're entitled to be as, whatever opinions that you have, that's fine. However, your freedom, what you see as an attack on your freedom, not to wear a face mask, is legitimately endangering my 8-year-old son. And so, yes, you're entitled to your opinion, but wear your damn mask. Like, that's all there is to it.
I've seen those videos, and you've probably seen them too, that go viral where there's some self-important jerk out there that, like, deliberately coughs in someone's direction.
Yeah, and I like it
feels so petulant and juvenile.
I will warn you right now. Like, I go to the grocery store by myself. I am like the only person in my household that leaves to do things. But if I am ever going to be out with my son, which I'm not because he's high risk, if I'm ever out and my son is there and he's wearing his mask and you cough deliberately in our direction and you're not wearing a mask, be prepared to die. Because I will kill you.
All right. Well, that got us a bit far afield from the idea of government power being unlimited.
Okay.
There was a movie called Outbreak. I think you might remember back before where there was an Ebola outbreak, and
I love the movie. I love the movie Outbreak. They have a fuel air bomb at the very beginning of the movie. And it's great.
Yes, exactly. They napalm this camp because it's got Ebola, and the government. That to me is where I think the far end of this is. Government power being unlimited. They say, all right, there's this infectious disease. We don't know how to control it. We don't know how it transmits, but we can't let it get out in the population, so these people have to die. And they firebomb the camp.
So that is the extreme end, and that is the far end of this, and this is what we have to be on the lookout for. Like, as conscientious citizens of this nation, we need to understand that sometimes things need to get a little uncomfortable, and like I'm of the opinion that yes, for the good of everyone, maybe we should suspend some freedoms for a defined period of time with clear milestones. There is no absolute power. There has to be checks on these things, or else we end up with the government firebombing small towns in the middle of nowhere.
Okay, so that leads to the second point he made. Religious freedom is paramount among our fundamental rights. He actually pointed out in this section something I hadn't considered, and that is when the founders of the United States of America wrote the Bill of Rights, not only was freedom of religion in the First Amendment, it was the very first thing they said. It was like the paramount right that they were defining when they founded this country.
And for historical context, they were looking at all the things that Britain did wrong that they were super mad about. And that was one of the big ones, because a lot of the people that came over to America from Britain was because they were being systematically religiously persecuted by the government.
And he kind of talks about it like it's a canary in the mine. Freedom of religion stands as a bulwark against unlimited government power. It safeguards the right to think for oneself, to believe what one feels to be true, and to exercise moral agency accordingly.
Wow. So that's super biased, and like I have some nitpicky issues with those exact words, but okay, we're going to roll that in. I'm going to go ahead and in my brain, I'm going to substitute that for First Amendment, because I think freedom of speech and freedom of assembly are also extremely important for the ideas that he's saying. Freedom of religion is undeniably important. Undeniably. I get that and I accept that. Is it the most? Let's not make a contest of it. Let's just say everything in there is very important.
I use the word paramount. He just said stands as a bulwark.
Fair enough. But the idea here is that like that that amendment was put into the Constitution to prevent the systematic persecution of a government against a religion. That's not what's happening. This is
all right.
The government.
Well, okay, so let me challenge you there, and let me take a bit of an argumentative point. Do you feel that religious groups haven't been singled out as almost made examples of gathering in this time of quarantine?
I don't, but I can't say that I'm fully aware. Like, it might just be because I'm unaware of it. Like, I don't feel like the religious groups are being singled out because I'm not a part of one and I haven't experienced it and I haven't read about it. So I don't know.
So you're probably a little bit aware because there's a few that have kind of pierced the consciousness and gone viral, as it were, into other areas where you don't even like consume news. Like there was one pastor in Louisiana that was just belligerently defiant and gathering and getting arrested and those kinds of things, and just was frankly just making a fool out of himself. But
so the difference there is that I'm not singling that out. I'm not categorizing in my brain like this religion made this decision. I'm saying this group of people, because I'm seeing the same things happen with bars, restaurants, and gyms. Yeah. There are multiple gyms in Arizona that are currently suing the governor for shutting them down last week. And it blows my mind. Like, so anyway, but I'm categorizing.
But are they suing on a moral basis, or are they suing because they're going broke and suing is going to get them some money and they can just continue working even though they don't want to just gather people together and get them sick?
I don't even want to talk about it. I don't even want to conjecture. But the idea is I categorize all those people together. There are people that are dissatisfied for whatever reason with these restrictions, and they are pushing back against them. And when we talk about religious, I don't break out the religion separately in a separate category. I lump them up into that group of these people are mad that they can't get together.
Okay, well that leads really well into the third point. Religious freedom is fragile. So here's what he said. Despite COVID-19 risks, North American jurisdictions declared as essential numerous services related to alcohol, animals, marijuana, and other concerns. But often religious organizations and their services were simply deemed non-essential even when their activities can be conducted safely. That
specifically, the one you talked about, marijuana dispensaries and liquor stores, like I threw that back in your face immediately, and I'm going to throw it back in your face now.
Go ahead.
All right, so essential services were defined as healthcare providing and pharmacies and that kind of thing. Now, it is not the fault of these regulators that medical marijuana dispensaries are lumped in with pharmacies categorically when we're talking about businesses. The same way that it's not their fault that grocery stores are essential services for people to survive, and that for some reason liquor stores are a niche and a subset under grocery stores when it comes to law. Like, that's not their fault. They're not going to comb through every single type of category of business because there is no bottom to that rabbit hole. It's like, okay, well, yoga studios can stay open, but hot yoga studios can't. You quickly, like, it devolves into this bureaucratic nightmare. So they had to make big, broad sweeping things. And that is a soundbite. That is not fair to say, like, oh, well, this medical marijuana dispensary is open, therefore my church should be open. We're talking apples and oranges here, and you're exploiting a niche and a bullet point and a loophole in this whole system to try to drive your point home harder, and it's not fair. It's not a fair argument.
So the idea, though, underlying this is that I'm saying these things are essential and these things are non-essential. And you, religion guys, are non-essential. Because we're talking about an actual danger to the public here, not an imaginary danger.
Okay. Well, they never said that. Okay, you're
I know.
That. Okay,
I know.
Okay. So now that is a much better way to put this. Is like by defining religion as non-essential, you take issue with that categorization in the first place.
Sure.
We'll put out what is essential. Like that doesn't matter. The fact that the religion gets categorized.
Someone
as
made a judgment call that it's more that religion is non-essential.
So this brought me to the one Google search that I did, and I searched and tried to research: does the government have the ability to limit the freedom of assembly? And it turns out they do, according to multiple Supreme Court cases. The one I'm going to quote specifically is Ward versus Rock Against Racism. There was this group that was called Rock Against Racism that apparently it was a very loud rock concert that they would put on in some park in New York. And it was like excruciatingly loud, like loud to the point where nobody within miles could sleep in the middle of the night because they were just rocking out so hard. And the Supreme Court held that they did not have the freedom to do that. Like, they claimed, that they're abusing our freedom of speech and freedom to assemble. And the Supreme Court held that, no, they don't. So apparently the government can limit the time, the place, and the manner of the freedom of assembly so long as those limits are justified without reference to the content of what is happening, are narrowly tailored to serve a significant government interest, and leave open ample alternative channels for communication. So the government does have the authority to limit these things so long as those other things are provided. In this case, applying that to what we're talking about now, is the government justified without reference to the content? They are not deliberately targeting religions. They are saying religion is not essential. They're not saying this religion is non-essential. They're saying all religion is non-essential to gather right now. That it is nothing to do with the content. It is about the situation. They've shut down multiple things, not just religion. So it's not just you guys. It's not a religious persecution. It's not a witch hunt. Second, is it narrowly tailored to serve a significant government interest? Keeping people from dying from COVID-19, I would argue, is a significant government interest. And lastly, they need to leave open alternative channels for communication. I feel like in this day and age, there are ample ways that you can still congregate virtually, digitally. Like I just assume that your church is still putting on regular services over the internet.
So I'm going to educate you a little bit, just because you don't know, although you're probably aware of it just from general consumption of media. But let's assume, and this isn't true of my church, but let's assume you belong to a religion where you believe, like, for instance, if someone's going to die, that you need to administer last rites to them to assure that their soul will go to heaven.
Okay.
And that requires you to be physically present. You have to, hit them with anointed oil or whatever like that.
Okay.
And that's being prevented because it's non-essential. Even if I can do it safely within the transmission guidelines and those kinds of things.
Well, my counter argument to that is the delivering of last rites is not equal to a regular weekly service for people that are completely healthy.
Sure, but he gives in this speech, he gave a specific example where that exact thing was prohibited.
My wife was telling me about these nightmare stories where people that had the COVID-19 that were dying in the hospital were not allowed to have visitors. Their last words and testament or whatever was all delivered via web chat.
Yeah.
And I was explaining to her that wouldn't happen. And she goes, but they won't let you. And I'm like, they can try to not let me, but I'm going to handcuff myself to my son's bed if he's in there. And that's just it.
Well, if you remember, my son had appendicitis back in May, and he was dicey there for a while. And he did not have a single visitor the whole time. The whole hospital was on lockdown.
If your son was 8, would you have visited him regardless of the circumstances?
I assume they had exceptions based on age. He was 20, of course, so it was a bit different, but yeah.
But this is the thing, and I get that. To the last rights argument, that's not. But this is the thing: it's not the government deliberately persecuting this religion. It is this specific instance of religion getting caught in the crossfire. This is the situation we are in. These are the steps we are taking to try to fix that. And there is there is no end to the list of people that are taking exception to this for whatever reason. And that specific example is just one in a laundry list of, well, what about last rites? And like maybe somebody should go through and start checking off these boxes. Like, yes, of course, go deliver your last rites with these protections or whatever. But it was not the intent of the government to stop that from happening.
Sure, I get it. And in any mass system where you're making some type of edict or decision, at the cut line between what is and isn't allowed, just like what happened with my promotion, there's going to be this ragged edge where some things are unjust one direction or unjust the other direction. Maybe you don't get this as much with 2 kids, but I definitely get it with 6, where I make a rule or a law or a proclamation, and one of my kids goes, that's not fair because you didn't let me and you let him, whatever.
Okay, so for bad at parenting, the obvious answer to whenever your kid says that's not fair, you look them dead in the eye and say, life's not fair.
So that's a great example of the kind of approach Uncle Sam could take here. If you let a marijuana dispensary open, but you're not letting me save people's souls, that's not fair.
Then the press secretary for the White House should have said, tough took us, and like mic dropped on the stage. Like that'd be the end of it.
Because I'm the dad. And that's the danger here, that we get the government taking the because I said so approach instead of having to justify what they're doing based on the constitutionality of their actions.
Okay. So do you want to switch sides now or do we want to keep talking?
One more thing.
Okay.
No, okay, let's do it.
Okay. We're switching sides. I am now taking on the role of the government should never have ever done this, and how dare they? And you are taking on the role of sometimes the government should be taking actions in the best interest of the government, whether or not that violates fundamental rights.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's my opening argument, and I'm going to win right now. You ready?
Okay, go ahead.
Internment camps for Japanese Americans in World War II. Like, how dare you steal the livelihoods and destroy literally the lives of tens of thousands of U.S. citizens just because they look different. This is nothing short of that, and the government should not have this ability and the authority to dictate these kinds of terms for any reason because we end up with concentration camps in America.
Yeah, the slippery slope argument's convincing. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to take the same tone of ridiculousness and say, religion says it's saving people's souls, but there's no proof of it. You can't even prove that there's a God. We tolerate you gathering together and having your little meetings, but I can prove that COVID-19 is contagious and that it will kill people, and I'm not going to allow you to do something foolish by gathering your group of people together to pretend that you're saving people's souls when you're actually endangering their lives.
But if I'm endangering my life, that's my business. Like, if I want to go to a church service, if I want to go, it doesn't matter where I go. Like, I have the freedom to do these things. This is in the First Amendment. You telling me I have to wear a mask? That's ridiculous. You can't tell me what kind of shirt I'm supposed to wear. Like, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I pay my taxes. There's absolutely no reason I can't go to church and be a good Christian every Sunday.
There's a fundamental underlying economic concept I think I learned from reading Frickonomics that's going on here. You talked about it earlier in the context of passwords, but it's what's called a negative externality. It's when a person does a behavior that causes bad things to happen to other people. And you gave an example of having a very secure password, but that actually has the negative externality that if a hacker's trying to hack you and you're secure, he'll move on to someone else. The negative externality is now your good security has made someone else more in danger. And in this case, transmission of an infectious disease, you can say, I'm accepting risk or I'm accepting danger to myself, which would be fine if there wasn't a negative externality that went along with that now you're propagating this virus.
Okay. I'm not going to lie. I'm having a really hard time coming up with what else to say here because everything that I'm coming up with is because I genuinely don't believe this side of the topic, I'm having a hard time with it.
Yeah.
I get, and that's all I really had was the slippery slope argument. And I get that. And I even understand and accept the slippery slope argument here. We cannot let the government run unchecked. At the same time, I still, all these, I call them nut jobs. That's not the people with differing opinions. They should understand that these are weird times and weird circumstances. And maybe I'm a little more like sensitive to this right now because we are setting new records every day for the number of infections and the number of people that are dying and like the number of people that are in hospital beds and on ventilators and all this stuff in Arizona. And looking at the numbers and like it's scary, it's frightening because all of these numbers are coupled with all of these stories of people deliberately flaunting and ignoring all of the regulations and the recommendations. Like there's going to be a tipping point. We talk about the other big conspiracy theory about vaccines. And whether you're for or against vaccines, we're not talking about that. What we're going to talk about is herd immunity. There are some people on this planet that literally cannot accept vaccines. Their body will reject and have terrible consequences if they try to get a vaccine. And so it is important for the people around them that they interact with on a daily basis to be immune to the disease. Because if they're immune to the disease, they don't get it and they can't transmit it to the person who is not immune to the disease. That's herd immunity. The same kind of thing applies here. Yes, people are going to get sick, but if we social distance, if we wear the masks or whatever, then the spread and the speed at which people do get infected is a manageable rate. The people that get sick flow into the hospital, people get well, and they flow back out. And the healthcare system is not overwhelmed. And that is the key level and the key thing that we're looking at in this entire thing. Can the healthcare system provide for the people who need it as they get infected? Yes, I get it that you want to go out and you want to go to church every week, Ben. I understand that. But that is one more drop in the bucket that is negatively impacting the herd immunity concept. Like that is one more transmission vector where people can get infected that will increase the overall rate of infection, which could tend us to this tipping point where now we have people dying in the streets because there is literally no space in the hospitals. Like, and that's not what's happening now. I get it. I'm talking about the apocalyptic, like end of the world style scenario. But the whole concept of doing this organized social distancing thing now is to prevent that from happening. And we can't do it afterwards. If it gets to that point, it's done and over. And the infection rate is so high, you can no longer control or stop it.
Yeah. As you know, I'm very sympathetic to that. I'm not an antagonist here.
You are the bad guy.
I've frankly been enjoying not going to church every week. But I just had a little bit of a wake-up call from this. He, right before his conclusion, he says, while believers and their religious organizations must be good citizens in times of crisis, never again can we allow government officials to treat the exercise of religion as simply non-essential. Never again must the fundamental right to worship God be trivialized below the ability to buy gasoline.
So
that was my wake-up call, and that's kind of my closing argument there.
Oh, your closing argument. Well, and then to close this whole thing is, I agree with you. Like the freedom of religion, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of speech, all of the First Amendment rights are critically important to what makes our nation different than communist, or actually even current Russia or North Korea, or people that can't fight against what the government is doing. Like you have to be able to fight this oppression. That's what this country was founded on, and I get that.
Hong Kong's barely hanging on there.
Yeah, who knows what's going on behind that iron curtain, right? And nobody cares because that's where all the stuff comes from. So we'll just let them do their thing. Suicide nets or not. But like, it's a fine balance. And I'm more, we started this, you're right, we're not antagonists. We are just slightly on different sides of the middle, I think, of this same argument.
Yeah.
We both have the same end state. Yeah. We want people to be,
characterize it.
We're not extremists. And the fact, you know what might be influencing this is the fact that you are in Illinois and it is a very cold spot, and I'm in Arizona and things are only getting worse and more dire by the day because our government is refusing to take decisive action. And so I'm over here stressing and worrying about the health of my family, and all I see is a government that is hesitant and unwilling to take these strong steps because of political reasons. And so that makes me frustrated, and that's pushing me more to the side of we need stronger intervention in things like this. And maybe I should be more sympathetic to your side of the argument where maybe we do need to take a harder look on the freedoms that we're impacting and what are the long-term ramifications of allowing something like this to happen in the first place.
Yeah, it's always nice when the government's taking strong action on something you believe in. This is a quote by German Martin Niemöller. from Lippstadt, Germany, who lived basically in the period between World War I and World War II when the Nazis took power in Germany.
Oh, is this I didn't care until they came for me?
Yeah, this is it. I'm going to read it because I think I deserve. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me.
You know, if we want to get super political on this podcast, like one thing I've noticed about American politics recently, some of the stuff coming out of, I'm just going to say Twitter, it feels very pre-World War II Germany type rhetoric and dogma that's coming out of some of the highest levels of government. And it is legitimately frightening.
It is. All right. Well, enough of that.
Enough of that.
So I had one thing I want to propose for next time. There's an interesting resurgence that Avatar: The Last Airbender is enjoying because it's getting what they call the Netflix spike, where before it was only available if you like bought it online or whatever, had the DVDs or something, and Netflix picked it up, and now it's been in their top 10 for like the past 10 weeks or something like that. And so lots of people are talking about it again like it's new, even though it's been around for 15 years. And I just watched the whole thing for the first time, just finished the last episode today, and I was enchanted in a way I haven't been with any television series I've watched maybe ever. And I want to give it the full Bad at Magic treatment, so I want to cue that up for next time.
I think I told you this back before, like episodes and episodes ago, that Avatar is legitimately good, and each individual episode served by itself seems like a kid's show, but there's like enough of a episode-to-episode plot and character arc and development that make it a legitimate storytelling masterpiece.
Yes, and I agree with everything you just said, and I want to get into it. So that 2 weeks, that'll give us some time to prepare. And if our audience is listening and you haven't yet watched it, or you haven't watched it in a while, it's on Netflix. Go ahead and take a look so you can have it fresh on your mind when we talk about it next time on the Bad at Magic podcast.
Excellent. So we're wrapping up?
Yep.
Okay, I want to say this because we talked about at the very beginning of this episode the whole free-to-play thing, and I am the guy that goes into the free-to-play game, and you're not going to get a red cent out of me, you game developers who worked your butts off for years and years on this thing. So, dear listeners, if you are like me and you listen to this podcast and you somewhat enjoy it, but you're not going to give us a red cent, you know what? I respect your opinion, but I will say this. I talked about that game on the podcast to you and to Ben. So if you're not going to give us a red cent, I'm absolutely okay with that. But the least you can do is recommend us to a friend. If you think we're producing good content, then you should share good content with the people that you love in your life, because that's just what a good friend does.